Well, hello again. My name is Philip Steiger. I'm with thebest3d.com, and here's another daily dose of PD Howler. As you can see here, I've been playing a little bit more with the paths and the curve tool, and in fact today I'd like to kind of do a repeat and take you into a few more of these features. What you notice with this particular brush that I currently have, this is a custom brush that I created. It's got some transparent part in the middle, right? So you can actually see through that. It's kind of confusing, but it's intentional, and there's a lot of things you can do with it, which is pretty fascinating. So let's see how I created this. Essentially, I went into the curve tool, and remember from last session that with the curve tool you can create a couple of points, like something like this, and if you have enough points it will turn it into a curved appearance, although you can still switch it on and off to straight lines, toggle it to that, or curved, spline curves. You can also have it not necessarily closed, so right now I had it closed. If I toggle it back to on, it will continue to keep it as a closed curve. I can then switch to this mode and grab the points to adjust their positions. Perhaps I want it to be a very regular symmetrical star, and in fact for that you might want to use some of the guides, artist guides. We call them down here in the grid section. There are rulers, there are guides, drawing grids, visible grids, and there's also artist guides, and you can adjust the density of these lines. Let's do a 6x6 for instance. And what that can help you with is basically where to position these pointers, these stars. It's not going to stay in the graphic, it's really just there as a visual guide, a visual helper. Let's put it down here, let's put one here and one here. Then we can turn the artist guides back off, and we have a star that looks kind of strange, but hey, that's what we got. So actually I'm not happy with it. Let me move this one here up a little bit like that. Okay, and then these two a little bit down, and sure enough it's really different. Anyway, what I want to do now is to use this as a shape to fill. I can actually, perhaps I'll use the curved mode like this. And remember, we can go and paint a brush against that path. So if that brush is something like the regular airbrush, instead of drawing, I could draw along the path like this. And you could also go and change color to make it a shrinking line. So it starts small, gets bigger, and then gets smaller again. Let's do that again. There you go. So you can see the maximum size it reaches here. You can adjust as well. And there you go. Alright, so that already creates an interesting shape. Let's see what else we can do. We can fill it with a gradient. We can fill it with whatever the fill settings are. So right now I have fill settings that indicates that we want to use a gradient like here that goes vertically down. And what is the gradient? Well, we have a couple of choices here. We can choose all sorts of presets. The fun part really is to play with your own though. If we use this one, we get this. Let's say we wanted it to be a little bit darker at the top and come back to dark at the bottom as well. For that, you'll want to go to the sweep editor. When you look at the gradients, there is also a sweep editor, and that one you can also reach from the window tool, and somewhere in there anyway. So what you'll want to do is to experiment with either the current setting and look at the red, green, and blue channels in order to give it a little bit more or less across the progression. You may want to start dark and then come up red and then reduce the red. And of course on the green side, well, that was not the red channel, that was the blue channel, and then the green. And sometimes maybe just the value, the amplitude, so you may want to make it darker while keeping the same hue. If you got little jaggies, you can go smooth them out here. Great tool to explore. There's lots of presets of different gradients. Let's take a look at this one for instance. If we use this, we'll probably get some color that looks pretty neat, like a horizon line. There's also the ability to just switch it, right? Click here to switch it the other way. There you go. A couple of other ways you can use that. There's actually many more. So we have 8 gradients here, and there are many more in here. We've seen some of that already. So let's say we'll go with one of these, and let's make it this one. There, why not? And we fill that in, and then I'd like to also add some sort of a border around it, or some of it on the inside. And remember, one thing we can do is also draw that into the what's that? The alpha channel. So in the alpha channel, you can go and let's see. First of all, you'll probably want to store that so that we can get back to that. Let me keep it down here. So one thing I'll do now is to grow that alpha channel, grow the selection. So grow alpha, then here. Let's give it about 5 pixels. And you can tell here, if I zoom in a little bit, you can see that some of it went to the outside, some of it went on the inside, because it was a self-overlapping or self-intersecting curve to begin with. So now this time, what I'll do is I'll store that as well. Store alpha. And I have one now that's slightly different from the original. You can notice particularly here, there's sort of a passageway, whereas that one was just a singularity. And then I'll do the opposite. I'll go and go back to the original alpha selection, and this time instead of growing it, I'll shrink it. Same amount or different amount, doesn't matter. And so now it's coming to the inside of these lobes. And that one I will also select to store. Right, so we now have one where it's disconnected in these corners, and we have one where we got the nice fat transition. Well, we can do the same thing we saw in the other lesson. We can grab this as the basic starting point, click on replace, and put that into the alpha channel. And then here we say subtract this selection from it. And so what you end up getting are bands that are selected, whereas nothing is selected in the red zone or on the other areas inside and outside. Just the bands are selected, and in fact we can go and store that as well, just to grab a snapshot of that. And now you see we have those selected bands. We may not need these anymore. At least you would want to minimize them to get them out of the way, or just close them. We can quite easily get back to restoring those or recreating them from the curve tool if we ever need to go to, right? Because we can still go to the curve tool and redraw that as well. But we can also go to the fill tool now, and the selection mask, the alpha channel has this selection. We can in there actually go do a fill. All right. Now, when we do a fill in this area, let's say with the plain blue, if you fill in here on the white zone, it's going to find all the white pixels and fill them to blue as well. But it's going to stop, or to red, whatever the current primary color is. But what I'm getting to is that it's going to stop the moment you have something like a pixel that's a different color. So the problem is that if you do this here, you'll see some gradients filled, but eventually it stops. And the thing is that the tolerance is just not high enough to go all across. So what you want to do is increase the tolerance all the way to the max, perhaps, so that it can fill those entire areas. The alpha channel is going to be the hard limit beyond which it doesn't go. So the selection is going to contain that fill tool. We can also invert the selection and fill again, and now it's going to fill it with the opposite gradient. So that's an interesting way to create some more sophisticated shapes. Let's see if we can perhaps redo that again. Here's the star. Let's close this part, and let's go and perhaps also add a little bit of an embossed look to that. Let's see, selection, effects, emboss it. There, so that'll give us a little bit of an embossed look as well. So let's see, maybe I want to also fill in these areas. Now I don't know if these are selected or not selected. They're probably not selected because I was on the inside of these this star. So what I can do is simply go and invert the selection, right? And I can test it. I can go and paint in there now, whereas it doesn't paint inside of the embossed fat line there. Let me use undo. And so if I want to fill this again with the fill tool and perhaps a different gradient, there you go. You can do that right here, and I will fill it into the entire area that's selected because the tolerance is all the way up at the very top. So there's a variety of ways to perhaps contain it into just certain areas. If you reduce the tolerance, it won't go beyond a certain point. Now this one in the middle, I'm actually going to keep transparent. So once I'm done, let's select the outside there too. Okay, so now I'm going to clear the inside here, which means that I don't need the gradient mode for the fill tool. So the gradients I don't need, or I just set the gradient. Let's say I grab this gradient and I make it white all over. So even though I am actually filling the gradient, it's going to be white all over. Again, I may need to go a little bit with the tolerance to make sure it fills it everywhere, especially if there already is a gradient there or some mix of different colors. So it doesn't stop the moment it finds a different pixel value. All right, so we have this, and what I'd like to do now is essentially select just this part. So again, here's a new selection. Let's go and actually let's use the magic wand and select just this inner part. We do have too much tolerance on that selection, so let's go to the inside, perhaps a little bit more there. So, all right, so now we have the selection there, and I really want to pick up everything else, meaning the outside of that, and this part to leave it transparent. Okay, so right now my selection basically looks like this. I have this, and I need the inverse of that. Well, easy enough. When I've stored it, I can invert it right here, and then push that back in, and replace it with that. So now at this time, I do have a selection where I could go and pick the whole thing up into a custom brush. Now, I may not want to have it that big and that wide, so I'll just use the custom brush pickup tool and say I only want a portion of it, like this star from here to here. But the alpha channel will be respected and used, so that if I look at the brush, like when I store it right here, you can see it's got the plaid pattern on the middle. It's essentially transparent in there, but the outside is not. Alright, so I got a brush now. That's a custom brush that I created, in which I used the curve tool initially to draw the shape, and then some fill gradients, and it's getting more sophisticated. And the thing I want to do with this now is, first of all, clear the selection again and start painting with it. Now right now I got some transparency all over, so I'm going to go with the opacity way up here, and now you can tell that there is still some transparency in the brush itself, because as I'm painting, it leaves the inside untouched until I totally grow over it. Alright, and now of course the real fun part with that is to also use the mirror mode. We've seen this before. Maybe you will go with the horizontal mirror or maybe with the vertical mirror. I'd like to use just one of them on this tutorial. Let's go with just vertical. There you go. Okay, so let's put a couple of dabs here or there. It's getting really messy, but it's intentional, and you'll see why. One thing I'm going to do next is to use my filters and go to the transform filter. Okay, and remember how in the transform filter you can move it aside, you can rotate it, you can scale it, and look what happens there. Just phenomenal set of new patterns. You can also stop the tiling so you see where the base elements are. Let's say I put them at a tiny little angle like this, and then tile it, and do something like this. Ain't that beautiful? Alright, so we got an interesting picture here. I don't know, patterns for new background designs in 3D or something like that. Let's see what else we can do with that though. You know, we'll want to store that because we may want to get back to this or save it somehow on a file. But what I'd like to do next is perhaps fade it a little bit. Or to the contrary, if it is faded, you may want to expand the dynamic range. Here we got a good range all the way from very dark spots to very bright spots, and in fact maybe too much of it. So one thing I'll probably do here is to fade it a little bit. Let's go to adjust the value or hue saturation value, all of these, and saturation down a little bit. The value as well. The hue perhaps a little bit more on the bluish side. There you go. Alright, and then what I'll do is I'll use my stylize lighting tool to put a little light source on it. Now right now it's still doing the mirror thing, so it doesn't look like I got one light source. It's almost like mirroring that light source, and one of them comes from the top and the other one from the bottom. So if I don't want that, I should turn the mirror off, clear that, and then I can go back to my filter for the stylize effect lighting tool and move that to the upper right or lower left corner, or where these lines merge together. Perhaps I'll give it a little bit of a reddish tint or an orange look. There you go. Bring it down closer to the bottom, and let's add another light. This time will be a kind of a bluish, cyanish kind of color, and it will be brighter there, and a little bit more on the texture, less on the texture and intensity, and also increase the smoothness to show more of the big shapes or less of them, and more of the fine granular detail. Alright, and can you believe we started from just one curve that was a self-intersecting star and created this in probably a little bit more than 15 minutes. We'll probably have to see if we can cut this into something that YouTube will allow us to upload. Anyway, so that was another example of something we can do with the curve tool, and I hope this was educational, and hope to see you soon back on another Daily Dose.